Cool. I think we might kick off. So thank you for joining us today. Welcome and happy Halloween to those who are celebrating it today. So today's webinar titled "What is Consumer Duty Compliance and Why Do I Need to Take Action Now?" For those with a keen eye, they will notice that our original moderator, Olivia Fahy, is not present today. She's unfortunately taken ill and in bed, so we wish her a very speedy recovery. My name is Adeline Han. I'm a program director with Recordsure and the TCC group and a member of our consumer duty delivery team. So I will be your moderator today instead. So today is a very important day. It marks the first important date within the consumer duty timeline where firms are expected to have agreed their implementation plans with their boards or governing bodies. So what this means is that the firms should have considered their approach to the duty, how they're thinking about good customer outcomes, which includes, of course, what is the definition of a good outcome for them? And then finally, what gaps are there between their current practices and where they need to get to by the time that the rules comes into effect in 9 short months for new existing products and services, and then in 2024, of course, for closed products and services. It's a signal from the SCA that firms need to take consumer duties seriously and engage with the step change that the FCA are looking to see. Today is our very first in a series of 3 webinars focused on consumer duty. And today in this seminar, we were talking about what it means for firms in reality, what the regulatory expectations are, and how the technological innovations can help firms achieve compliance without introducing excessive additional costs to their operations. Today, you'll see 2 lovely gentlemen on the panelists today. We have Neil Dethick, who is our resident consumer duty expert and associate director at TCC Group. And we have Gary Evans, who's our chief product officer at Recordsure and TCC Group. Today's webinar, the structure will be in 3 key areas. We will kick it off with Neil kind of giving an overview of what consumer duty is and its 4 outcomes. We'll then move swiftly on to a panelist discussion where we will talk about some of the key challenges and what this means for firms in reality. And then on the 3rd section, we will answer your questions. We have some pre-submitted questions already. But if you do have questions as you hear the discussion, need further questions, please do drop them in the Q&A box. I'm sure you're all very familiar with webinars now, but a couple of housekeeping things to talk about. As I mentioned, if you have any questions, feedback, comments, do pop it into the Q&A box. We do have other colleagues who are monitoring that, and we will hopefully get to them if time permitting. You would have kind of seen the sign. The session today is recorded. The recording will be shared with you after the event. So look out for an email from us in your inbox tomorrow. We're looking to end the session at 2:45, giving you 15 minutes of a cup of tea time before your 3 o'clock. So we will try to be prompt and finish at 2:45. Without further ado, I will hand over to Neil, who will talk through consumer duty and the 4 outcomes. Neil, over to you.
Thanks, Eileen, and good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully we're seeing a purple slide up in front of us. And as we go through the slide deck, we'll get some idea of where we stand. But hopefully my initial presentation will be a repetition of what many of you have heard before, using some well-worn phrases and principles to guide us through. But I thought it'd be worth a quick recap on what consumer duty is and where it all stands, where we should be heading. So, before I move to the next slide, consumer duty confirms one overall overriding principle, which is a firm must act to deliver good outcomes for retail clients. Now, that's a very high-level statement, and as such, a lot of firms are already saying to us, well, we do that as a matter of principle anyway. But consumer duty is more than just that, as I'm sure you're aware. It contains 4 outcomes, which all firms need to consider. First of all, being consumer understanding, understandable, easy to follow communications that genuinely help customers make informed decisions. The second outcome that the regulator is looking for is under the products and services outcome, which is user-friendly products and services designed to meet customers' needs, offering fair value and taking behavioural biases into account. The third outcome we need to consider is consumer support, offering the support to the consumer when they need it, with support that works for all customers across all mediums and platforms, with obviously consideration of vulnerability concerns being paramount as well. And finally, the one that's taxing most firms at the moment is the price and value outcome, which is where firms are required to deliver fairly priced products and services which deliver true value to customers. So those are the overarching outcomes designed to deliver the good outcomes that is the overarching principle there. So if we take each outcome very quickly by itself, customer understanding, which, as we mentioned, is understandable, easy to follow communications, understandable, easy to follow communications that genuinely help customers make informed decisions. So what does that actually mean? So what does what steps need to be done to ensure that this part of the duty is fully understood? So a couple of questions that we'd be throwing out there. So how much research has the firm done into understanding what the customers need? How is consumer understanding factored into product design? Does the consumer understand the product and service throughout the product or service life cycle, not just at the point of sale? What methods has the firm done to ensure that continued consumer understanding, and what evidence have they got that consumers continue to understand the product or service that they're signed into? How do you know that consumers understand the product? What market research has been done? How do you understand whether your communications are relatable? So are they designed, as I say, for the target market? What research has been done into the target market about the information that's being sent out?
Neil, sorry to jump in. We can actually see 2 slides. So,
oh, hang on. This is technology is overtaken. Is that any better?
That is better.
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, so all those questions under consumer understanding need to be part of the thought process that firms go to when they're designing their plan for consumer duty implementation. Products and services is the next one, which I mentioned. So truly understanding that the products and services that are being offered are suitable for the target market. So we come across lots of situations where it's a one service fits all approach. Is that really appropriate, and is that really part of consumer duty? Is the service designed for the target market again? What understanding of the target market has been factored into product design, for example? Again, all the questions that should be part of your consumer duty considerations as you move forward. Consumer support, offering the right support at the right time. How easy is it for consumers to get hold of the right person to answer any questions? What support is available throughout the product life cycle, not just at the outset? Is that support equal throughout the product life cycle as it was to the very start of it? So is there as much support available to the consumer throughout the journey with the particular product? Is the support easy to access? Is it the right sort of access? Is the right medium used? If you have a predominantly elderly client base, is the consumer support available? If it's mainly online, is that going to be appropriate for the target audience? Again, those sorts of considerations need to be taken into account. And price and value, and as I mentioned at the outset, this is the one that seems to be taxing an awful lot of firms at the moment. How do you know that your product or service is offering good value? What benchmarks have you taken? What defines, how do you go about pricing your products, and what defines the pricing? The FCA is all for commerciality and everything, but what is the definition of fair value? One of the big issues we're coming across at the moment is pricing. So if a product is priced at a flat fee or a flat percentage, is there a level playing field for clients if they're investing or borrowing a smaller amount to a large amount? if a product is being taken that's 10 times the amount of another product, is that worth 10 times the fee, for example? So those sorts of things are particularly exercising some of the firms we're dealing with at the moment. So price and value is going to be a key consideration, and evidencing that is going to be important. So again, it's the MI that's going to be a vital part of your considerations as you move through these things. There's some overarching considerations as well that Consumer Duty will require of us. So a key thing, and a lot of firms haven't even thought about what the definition of a good outcome is, or even what the definition of a poor outcome is for their clients. Can you define what that actually looks like and articulate it more importantly? There's going to be an awful lot more of the MI requirements and data suites, which will allow the decision makers in a firm to make their effective decisions on consumer duty. An awful lot more governance is going to be required along that, which leads into the monitoring and assessment point there as well. Consumer duty, by its very nature, is going to require an increased level of monitoring, an increased level of supervision over what a firm actually does. One of the key components is understanding the target market, as I've alluded to beforehand. So what research has a firm done into understanding what their target market are looking for? What evidence has a firm gathered to show that their products and services are appropriate? By now, you should be fairly well along in terms of the gap analysis that Consumer Duty requires, of understanding where your current client journey stands against requirements of the new regime. So again, if this is not done, it's something certainly we'll be covering a bit later on in terms of what steps you should have taken by now. Consumer duty is going to require some key stakeholder involvement. There's going to be project committees, assignment of responsibilities, etc., etc. And understanding that the duty is proportionate and appropriate to firm size is fine, but it's certainly going to impact on all firms, and so all firms are going to require the involvement of individuals to take responsibility for delivering consumer duty. And finally, as Adeline mentioned earlier, is the urgency and awareness of this. 31st of October marks the first in the key milestones for consumer duty. And if firms aren't aware of what they need to do by now, there's, dare I say it, an issue there that needs to be addressed. Consumer duty is not something that can be ignored. It's not something that just can be swept under the carpet and say, well, we're delivering good outcomes, we're treating customers fairly at the moment. It does require work to prove and to prove that you're implementing consumer duty and its requirements. So lots of work to do before the next milestone date, the 31st of July next year. And as we go through today, we'll hopefully give some idea of where you need to be at the moment and why it's important that compliance teams are taking this seriously and moving forward. So that's where we are at the moment. Adeline, I'll hand back to you now to take matters forward.
Thanks, Neil. You can stop sharing screen now as well, if you'd like. We will move swiftly across to the panel discussions now. We essentially have 3 questions, and we'll open it to Neil and Gary to have an open conversation. Like I said before, if you have any questions, please do pop them into the Q&A section as we're going along, and we will monitor those. We have colleagues monitoring the Q&A. So the very first question, if you ask any firm, they will say that they put the customer at the heart of everything they do. So if this is the case, do firms really need to do anything to be compliant with the consumer duty, and how is this different? And Neil, you're still sharing screen, so thank you. I will get Gary, you to kick that off first, if you'd please.
Yeah, thanks, Adeline. Good afternoon, everybody. Do you know what? We've had a number of conversations with a number of organisations, and it's quite common for us to hear it's not really for us, this particular regulatory change. It's for the people who aren't doing TCF properly, and this is simply a matter of TCF on steroids. We put the consumer at the heart of everything we do, so we're okay. And in many ways, that is true. The reason why the FCA have put consumer duty in place, because they have seen lots of examples where organisations aren't doing what they should do. They are putting kind of communications out that are misleading or difficult to understand. They're putting barriers in place to make it hard to switch products or to switch organizations. And they're not treating vulnerable customers properly. They're not delivering fair value for money. So for the kind of ethical, kind of highly professional organizations that we are talking to say, it's okay, we've got this under control because we are very professional, we're very ethical, is fair. However, that doesn't mean that you are actually compliant with the way the FCA are going to be monitoring this. This is not actually TCF on steroids. It's the one I hear most common. It's not TCF on steroids. It is a fundamental change in the way that the regulation is going to take place and be supervised. There is the single big change is moving from guidance to outcomes. And the requirement for you to be able to evidence outcomes rather than prove that you have a high quality kind of policy on vulnerable customers, or that you have a kind of 3% random check-in that you've always done and you only get a 2% failure rate on your QA checks, is not going to be enough anymore. The FCA are going to require an awful lot more from you, even though you are doing things correctly. The most common problem that people have when it comes to Section 166s or kind of compliance problems with enforcement is not the fact that they have delivered poor outcomes. It's they cannot evidence they've delivered good outcomes. And that is where the big change is going to be here. They'll also be looking at different ways of supervising. So the FCA have been signaling for a while now they're going to kind of make a shift towards an assertive supervision, and being able to request information and data upfront so that they can decide whether they are kind of happy or not with what's going on, and make it so that it's your problem to provide them with the right information rather than their problem to try and find things that are wrong. It's going to be a big change. So despite the fact that I'm sure everyone on this webinar is very much compliant with the principles and the way in which the guidance was written for TCF, that doesn't mean there's no work to do to become compliant with consumer duty.
Neil, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, obviously I'd agree with everything that Gary says there. And the one of the biggest changes to the way people work is going to be in the governance and the oversight that's provided that consumer duty requires, which means there's going to be an awful lot more emphasis on providing MI that informs decisions. It's also going to be an awful lot of, as Gary mentioned, evidence-led decision making that needs to be taken. The volume of work that is required to get to there is going to be significant as well, and it's not just a question of saying, well, we haven't got any complaints, for example, therefore we're treating customers fairly. We are delivering good outcomes because our customers tell us we're delivering good outcomes. That's all well and good, but it's how do you evidence that and how do you show that you're making good decisions that lead to the good client outcomes that's coming up. So that's a key difference regarding the way it's been taken forward by the regulator.
Great. So there's a clear difference between consumer duty and TCF. You kind of mentioned a little bit on that already. Do we think that this is appreciated across the industry? And who is responsible for ensuring consumer duty compliance? And in fact, do these people appreciate the gravity of the change?
Is it appreciated across the industry? Yes and no, and yes and no is the unhelpful answer to that. We speak to a lot of firms, and some firms are well advanced in their thinking on consumer duty. Plans are in place, gap analysis has been completed, and there's a good understanding of what needs to happen to be consumer duty compliant. That's on one hand. On the other hand, there's firms that have done very little about this and are beginning to panic a little bit, as one might imagine. Implementation plans we've seen, some are very detailed, very documented, and very structured, whilst others would be well, let's call it a plan for a plan, perhaps, is the best way to describe it. Appreciated across the industry, yes, I think it is beginning to be appreciated across the industry. I think the mists are clearing, and firms are beginning to understand the significant amount of work, albeit proportionate, the significant amount of work that's going to be required to demonstrate, not just say they're compliant, but to demonstrate compliance with consumer duty.
Gary?
You know, I can't imagine that Neil, he knows more about this stuff than I do. But I guess from a kind of who does this affect, kind of who's responsible perspective, there's been a lot of talk specifically from the FCA about what the board are required to do as a result of consumer duty. And there are kind of significant requirements. There's a talk, everyone has to have their consumer duty champion. This has to be the implementation plan has to be signed off by the board. The consumer duty and the outcomes need to be reviewed at board kind of on an ongoing and regular basis, and that needs to be demonstrated. So there are significant board responsibilities for monitoring, measuring, and kind of reviewing kind of consumer duty compliance. But it's not a solely board responsibility. This goes right the way down. So kind of first line, second line, third line of defence, everybody is included in consumer duty. Everyone has a requirement to deliver kind of good outcomes to customers on the front line. The biggest change, as kind of for me, kind of reading the regulation, is in the second line. So you can argue that there are limited frontline changes, especially for organisations who are doing things right already. And so kind of, whilst there may be some additional reviews of products to ensure that the products that have been sold historically are being sold today are actually kind of being done in the correct way, have reviewed the correct target markets, are being targeted at the right people, and there's value for money. But the bigger challenge is going to be in the ongoing consumer journeys and ensuring that the support and the understanding is being delivered. And so the QA function, which in many organizations is typically will review 3 to 5% random sample of kind of calls and documents that are being sent out. That's unlikely to cut muster, I think, under the new consumer duty regulations. There's going to be a need for far greater oversight of outcomes in order for anything to be statistically significant. I mean, because everyone does a good job, there's only kind of 2 to 3% of cases that go through the process that anyone identifies as any compliance issues with. So if you're doing a random sample of kind of 3 to 5%, and only 2 to 3% of those 3 to 5% are bad, you're seeing a very tiny proportion of the cases that are kind of delivering poor outcomes. And so again, a far higher kind of coverage and oversight of QA is going to be tremendously important. And that's obviously going to need either more QA people or some sort of tech enablement of the QA people to make them more effective and more efficient, which I think is going to be kind of one of the biggest challenges going forward for organisations trying to be consumer duty compliant.
Just coming back on a point there, Gary, as well. Whilst it's I guess the ultimate responsibility of the board to ensure a firm is compliant with the consumer duty, I guess it's going to be the SM16 function that's going to be the person who shoulders the responsibility, should we say, who is dealing with the work that's required there. So I think the question was who is responsible for ensuring consumer duty compliance. There's two ways of looking at that. It's the ultimate responsibility of the board, but that in all probability will fall on the SM16 to define that they are compliant.
And I would add as well, so we've been out there talking to people for the last few months, and when we've been talking to organisations, and typically kind of chief execs, chairman, SM16s in organisations about consumer duty and how they feel about it and what they're thinking of it. We've been accused of cage rattling a couple of times, and then thanked for it, because it appears that quite a lot of kind of senior people in kind of very professional organisations are not necessarily understanding the requirements of consumer duty and what it'll mean for them. So I think there's been a little bit of a blasé attitude in some cases where it's been, hey, look, we're fine. And when we get into the detail of exactly what type of evidencing is required, how you need to kind of show a whole consumer journey and kind of prove that the outcome is there for that particular consumer, rather than simply show a broad set of guidelines and principles, that has created some fear and resulted in them going back and kind of looking a bit more detail about what's being prepared and what's going on for consumer duty. So yeah, it has been a very interesting few months for us talking to people, because I guess from the very start we were preparing for this, and we were digging into consumer duty and trying to work out what's the difference, what does it mean, is there anything in this that we need to help our clients, our potential clients do. And for me, it clicked quite quickly the whole evidencing piece, and that evidencing was the biggest challenge with consumer duty. But I think there's a bit more of a, if we're doing the right thing, we'll be okay, kind of frame of people's minds in some of the conversations we've had, at least at the start. And by the time we got to the end of the conversation, people were feeling slightly different.
Yes, indeed. And I think the kind of final question for the panel discussion, which seems like reading some of the questions is going to be very similar kind of ilk. We mentioned that we've been talking to a lot of clients about consumer duty, some who are very prepared and some who may not think that they need to do much, if anything. Can you give us some example of the areas that people are particularly concerned about, and either at the beginning of the call or at the end when their cages have been rattled, and where there's work to be done? Neil, did you want to kick us off?
Sure, yeah. Well, as I mentioned beforehand, it's the price and value outcome that's always comes up in conversations that we hold with various firms. And a big question that's been asked is what warrants value? What defines value? How do a firm confirm that they are offering true value to their clients? And it's a very difficult question to answer. I gave a quick example earlier on, and it's worth referring back to that. So ad valorem fees, where you're charging a percentage fee based on the value of the investment or value of a mortgage, for example. And let's say you get an example of a mortgage for £100,000 or a mortgage for £1 million, and there's a flat fee based on the size of the lend. Is there 10 times the work for £1 million mortgage than there is for a £100,000 mortgage? The answer is probably no. Probably some extra work and some extra duty of care that's required. But how do you justify a fee that's 10 times that value? And those are the questions that are exercising people's minds at the moment. Some firms are moving to consider an hourly rate, for example, on price and value, by working out how much time is spent in delivering the product or the service to the client and charging on an hourly basis. Some are moving to a price capping mechanism that caps the fee at a certain level, or offers a bespoke pricing model above a particular level of fee. And we've got others who are looking at structured levels, so up to a certain amount gets charged a specific fee, and then another fee for anything above that to another level, etc., etc., etc. I think it's fair to say that the flat charging structure, the percentage fee, is probably not consumer duty compliant as it stands at the moment. But pricing and fees is a big area that people are concerned with. A lot of the work that's going on behind that includes benchmarking prices and fees against competitors, assessing exactly what the component parts of a pricing structure are and what value they add to a particular client. Potentially unbundling the product fees, the service fees, so that clients have a choice of what they take and then for priced appropriately to the level of service that a client requires. etc. So there's lots to think about over the price and value. And again, it's never going to be a one-size-fits-all approach here. But the key here is understanding what value is, what the value is, sorry, of your product or service that's being offered. Other areas, customer understanding being one.
Sorry,
So,
Neil, before you jump into that, there was a question, and I think you've answered it, but just so that we can close that out. On the pricing and fair value outcome, is there guidance to ensure consistency across all providers, or this is for the firms to decide themselves? And I think you kind of semi-answered that already, but just wanted to close that out.
I mean, I go back to the proportionate approach. There won't be a one-size-fits-all approach to pricing. Every firm will have nuances to their the service and products that they're offering, and a firm should be able to articulate the value that that product or service is adding to the client, and therefore why that service or product is worth the fee that's being paid. So I wish there was a quick guide to this, a quick fix where everyone could say, yeah, we're doing this because, or we're charging this because of X, Y, and Z. But it's all about understanding what value your specific products and services are offering to your target market.
Can I jump in there? Because like Neil obviously right, and the FCA never give guidance on this. If they ever kind of wrote anything down in stone, there'd be a way around things, and they avoid that like the plague. But it can be very much easily seen that having to prepare and be ready for Consumer Duty, especially on a price and value and a product basis, is extra work, and it's extra work for very little value. The FCA would argue, well, you should be doing this anyway. This should be part of what everybody does as part of running their business. But one extra benefit, I think, is, especially in the mortgage industry, is to mitigate the risk of future case management claims. Case management companies are kind of rife. They're always looking for the next thing. They've been through kind of PPI, they've been through kind of diesel claims. With the mortgage industry being where it's at, and with the changes in interest rates, and with people coming off low fixed rate deals and having to go on to kind of variable rate deals because they don't qualify for future fixed rate deals, or the equity release problems that are going ahead. If you have all this information, if you are keeping the outcome data for consumers, if you're able to prove why and how you did and made the decisions you did, then actually you are in a far stronger position to push those off. It feels like it's an obvious one for me. No matter which way the market goes, there will always be kind of a hindsight view of what the right answer should have been for consumers. And so case management companies will be coming for the mortgage business. But if you are ready for Consumer Duty, then you are in a far better place to mitigate any future risk of those claims, because you have the information ready.
Absolutely. I think the question was about other areas as well of concern that we're hearing. Customer understanding, the whole outcome is sometimes being questioned by firms. How does a firm know that their consumers not only understand the product at the point of sale, but throughout the product life cycle? So annual reviews, for example, are a good way of demonstrating that a client continues to understand the product they've got and why it satisfies their needs and requirements. But we're looking at things like testing and feedback from customers throughout the product life cycle. Why have they got what they've got, not just now, but 5 years' time? What do the documents that are sent out, the client-facing documents, what do they actually say? Are they designed, and we see this an awful lot, are they designed to protect the firm and apply the current regulations, or are they designed to ensure the client can make an informed and good decision about stuff? There's a lot of work that needs to go on relating to consumer understanding of the product and service. The other area we're getting a lot of sort of raised eyebrows and furrowed brows is the monitoring and supervision aspect, and there's going to be an awful lot more demand on MI and how that's interpreted, and what board decisions are being based on. How does a decision maker come to a conclusion that a particular course of action should be taken? So there's going to be an awful lot more requirement on data collection on data analysis, and how that translates into governance. And that is only beginning to become clear now, in that, as I say, we mentioned before, the regulator's approach is a show me, don't tell me approach. The show me needs to be the MI, the data that's collected, the evidence behind the decision making to be consumer duty compliant. That's going to be crucial. So to name but 3 areas, and again, we can talk to a number of different firms, all of which will have different areas that they're particularly concerned with. But those, Adeline, appear to be the 3 that are causing the most consternation out there.
The theme coming out. Great. I am cautious we have pre-submitted questions and we have some live questions as well. So let's very swiftly jump into our Q&A section. So one of our kind of pre-submitted question, in the context of the 3 lines of defense model, what's the panel's view of the level of second line monitoring and assurance that should be provided of project implementation of consumer duty ahead of delivery implementation? Neil, did you want to kick us off first? I think we semi-touched on this already, but maybe we can extend on.
Yeah. I think Gary mentioned earlier on that it could be arguable that the consumer duty has a lesser impact on the front line than it does on the second line of supervision. And the second line of supervision, obviously, the front line, the first line of defence will be the front line. The second line of defence will be the internal compliance team. The third line being the internal audit function. But the second line of defence, as I say, it's arguable that they could be the most impacted team for consumer duty. So yes, so they're going. The second line of defence is going to be vital in the implementation of consumer duty. In that they're going to need the MI, they're going to need the data, as I mentioned beforehand, to inform decisions. They're going to need the themed reviews, etc., to be able to present to board level how the plan is going, how the implementation is moving forward, and what that will actually mean in terms of the action to be taken, if any, both at the front line and at board level. So they're going to be the grease that oils the cogs of the CD machinations to deliver the implementation. So a huge role to play for the second line of defence in the period up to the end of July next year. Great.
Gary, anything to add to that? I think we've covered.
I think we're covered.
Yeah. Next kind of pre-submitted question: what actions do firms need to take now on their 5-year corporate plans / budgets? Specifically, how will the new regulations affect plan, balance sheet? An interesting conversation. Who wants to kick us off?
Why not have a little crack at this one? I guess the quick and easy answer is negatively. There are extra requirements, there are extra things that are needed in order to be consumer duty compliant. You need a consumer duty champion. Now you can probably manage with somebody who's already a NED taking on that role, but it needs to be done. There will be additional kind of work in board to get that sorted. But the biggest impact is going to be in that second line. So I think either additional FD to do additional controls and QA, or additional technology, both from an upfront getting it ready perspective, so the implementation period, and also then on an ongoing basis to do the checks and the monitoring and capture the information and enable the compliance that you'll need to do under consumer duty. There may also be a kind of requirement to, if you are identifying more problems, more bad outcomes, to fix them. So there may also be kind of additional resources required to help with that as well.
Neil, anything to add to that?
No, I think Gary's answered that one.
Great. I'm going to jump to, there is quite a lot of questions about good outcome and what the definition of good outcome is. I think this particular question kind of sums it up very well. Although not defined by the FCA, has Recordsure attempted to produce a definition of a good consumer duty customer outcome?
Not yet, and not for all use cases. So I suppose it depends on what you've got. So typically, what Recordsure does, so TCC will probably have a more of a kind of an expert view on things, but Recordsure will typically take the QA frameworks that that the organisation utilises themselves to determine good outcomes, and then apply that via technology to ensure that you have a kind of clear picture across all of your kind of calls and cases. But Neil may have a better answer than me.
Yes, I think this one as well, Neil. Concern about multiple definition of good outcome. Whose definition will be right?
I'm not sure there is a right definition. The definition, though, should come from the firm itself, because a good client outcome will mean different things to different people. Consumer duty as a whole will mean different things to different firms. So, again, I want to be helpful, but I'm struggling to say, other than the firm itself defining what good looks like to them, it's going to be difficult to put an overview on what a good outcome looks like. It's something that should be discussed at board level. It's something that should be articulated, that says, in essence, to firm X, a good client outcome consists of ... And that could be anything from a client getting a suitable product, through to the service being as described throughout the product life cycle, to no complaints being received. As simple and as straightforward as that. It should be, as the answer should be as detailed as possible about what a good client outcome actually is for a particular firm. And if you've got that, then the work can start on the rest of it. In effect, that almost should be a starting point with consumer duty.
Yeah. And to be fair, I think you could argue, if you ask the FCA this, I'm sure their answer would be, we provided it with 4 clear kind of overriding principles for what a good outcome looks like. You need to be able to show that the product you provided offers value and is suitable for that consumer. You've supported them, identified any kind of vulnerabilities or requirements they have for support, and then provided against those requirements. And you've ensured that they've understood exactly what's going on all the way through the process to kind of accepting your product and then using it. And so I think there is a definition for good outcome. It's not as tick box as it could be, but I think that's exactly what consumer duty is all about. It's about defining what that kind of good outcome is.
Great. I'm just conscious of time. We're 2 minutes to 45 past, so I might wrap it up now. Apologies to those who we have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we can't get through them. We'll see if we can kind of answer some of them in the email that we will send you. Will be in your inbox tomorrow with the recording. And I kind of want to wrap it up with kind of a final wrap-up question. So as we noted earlier, today is 31st of October, and it is the first kind of deadline where your implementation plan should be board approved and ready to go. Would be curious from Neil and Gary, what your thoughts are about where firms should be now, and what then kind of next steps they should take now to future-proof themselves.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm going to go back to what we said 30 seconds ago, Adeline, and one of the steps that firms should be addressing urgently is articulating what a good outcome is, but in the same method, articulating what a poor outcome is for clients. And if you've got that, then you're starting your journey. Again, talking about the obvious stuff here, but there should be a working group set up, proportionate, accepted, but there should be a working group or a project to oversee implementation of consumer duty now. You should be beginning to understand what the governance arrangements will need to look like, what oversight needs to be provided for consumer duty. You should be examining your client journey from now on, and by doing that through a gap analysis, you should have been able to identify some, possibly not all, but some of the gaps that your current products and services provide when compared to the requirements of the duty. You should think about what consumer duty training is in place for your staff, and how that permeates throughout the business. And allied to that is your consumer duty communication strategy. How do you push this out to all your staff to ensure that everyone's bought into the requirements and what the firm is actually doing for consumer duty? So as at the 31st of October 2022, that's roughly where we think firms should be heading, and with a detailed monthly plan with monthly milestones to take forward, which we'll probably have a look at in future webinars, in terms of where that needs to be. But as with everything, the deadlines aren't particularly helpful, but they're not going to be amended. So it is really time to push on and start making some serious movements on the consumer duty front.
Great, thank you, Neil. Gary?
Do you know what? Neil's absolutely right, as he always is. One word is data for me. So I think the next steps for organisations, if the biggest gap is in evidencing, then it's kind of what data are you going to use to evidence? So it's how are you going to get from where you are today with what information you have available to where you need to be for consumer duty compliance at the end of July next year? What data do you need to be able to generate? How are you going to generate that? How are you going to kind of surface that and present it in a way that it can be monitored? And if the FCA asked you for it, you could give it to them and they would be happy.
Great. Thank you both. We are slightly over time. Apologies about that, but I hope that everyone, that was an informative session for you. So thank you for joining us. As we mentioned at the beginning, this is the first of 3 seminars that we will be hosting. The next one is the 16th of November, where we'll talk about regulatory expectations and how consumer duty will be supervised. We will delve deeper into what a good customer outcome is, which I can see there's quite a lot of questions there. So do join us on the 16th of November. And we will also be talking about what it means from a vulnerability perspective and how that impacts kind of vulnerable customers. So thank you again for joining us. And sorry I took 3 minutes off your tea time. And have a lovely day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.